Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop, EmeraldPlanet. All the ecology news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's your host, Executive Director of the EmeraldPlanet, Dr. Sam Lee Hancock.
Thank you for being with us as we come to you from Washington, D.C., bringing the EmeraldPlanet as we look around the globe on how we're going to create the EmeraldPlanet as we go through 21st century. We're looking at many of the issues, the problems, the challenges that we have, but at the same time on the EmeraldPlanet, we're always looking at what are some of the solutions. How can we move forward with confidence that as we go from 7 billion to almost 9 billion souls on this planet by 2050, are we going to be able to feed, clothe, provide the fuel, the fiber, and everything else that's needed? And so those are the issues of the 1,000 best practices that we're looking for. And so we have these experts that are coming on, sharing with us, giving and contributing as we link them to you, viewers around the globe, as we come to you again from Washington, D.C. I have a true specialist who's been at this many years, Dr. James A. Listorti, and he's a public environmental health specialist. And we're going to start off with one of his slides that he is sharing with us. And this is all about the challenges that we're being faced with around the globe as far as climate change, lack of water, internal mobility of human beings, and also the whole notion of food production. So Jim, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Glad to have you here. And I must say that Jim has been with us before. We were talking about the notion of malaria and the stresses that are caused in many societies with malaria. But in this first slide, let's bring this up and talk about some of the issues that we're faced with. And we're going to spend a little time with this particular slide. And Jim, looking at what we're doing, looking at the globe, what are some of the major challenges that we're faced with while they're bringing this slide up for us?
Well, people tend, when they talk about climate-related issues, they tend to focus on the industrial end of it and carbon dioxide and things of that sort. And those are very important. But what they don't necessarily talk about is the potentials for human conflict and human difficulties and just getting through the week.
Well, they're talking about, you know, this $7 billion is the whole thing we need as far as the looking around the globe. But, you know, the notion of this internal displacement is really becoming a huge issue because it's putting pressure. When I was recently in India, there was over 3 million Bangladeshis living along the canals and the railways. And so this is some of the things I believe that you're talking about.
Yeah, and Bangladesh has got to be one of the worst countries when it comes to that type of problem of internal migrations. But it's the additional stresses that those internal migrations cause. Because when you get an accumulation of people in one spot that's over the productive capacity at spot, then there you are. You've got even more hardship and even more problems confronting the people. There's no water, there's no sanitation, there's no food. Often, you know, food security is, how do you feed the people? Because if they're moving from a rural area because of a drought or because of a food problem, where's the food coming from?
Well, it's just looking at Haiti, Mali, Niger, some of these countries, you know, the internal displacement is absolutely huge because you have entire clans, entire tribal groups that are on the move within these areas. And I think the thing that you're talking about, Jim, is really highlighted in the notion of the earthquake in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. Had a city, literally it was built for 150,000 people, but yet it was 2.7 million people living within the confines of this large metropolitan area.
Well, the problem there was also exacerbated by the behavior of the poor Haitians who needed firewood. So they stripped the area, the surrounding area, the underbrush and the trees. So suddenly when you have a severe rainstorm, instead of just having a lot of water, I mean, you wind up by getting landslides and flooding and all sorts of additional.
Well, you're getting all the topsoil running off. They say if you look at the satellite photographs of Haiti after a major rainstorm or typhoon, that the brownish water is some 30 to 50 miles, you know, out into the Caribbean surrounding it. And so when you have that, there's no way to hold that moisture in there. Of course, then this goes again to job security, food security, protection of the environment. And what is about 98% of all the trees have been taken off of the whole country?
I don't know the number, but
that's the number I've read through the UNDP.
That's it's just exacerbating a difficult situation already.
Well, looking at this slide, this is a busy slide showing 4 different major impacts as far as climate change is concerned and internal displacements. Tell us a little bit about what we're looking at here, and how does this really relate to humankind as we're looking at this around the globe?
What you're looking at is you see all the colored areas. They're designating different types of stress that may be coming up. But looking at the colored areas, that you see that it's primarily developing countries. You see very little above the U.S. and over across in Europe. So it confirms the point that developing countries are the ones who are going to pay the biggest price when it comes to difficulties in environmental problems and the stresses that they're going to bring on, including conflicts. I mean, sort of people fighting.
Well, it's just like if you go to Africa and the DRC, Democratic Republic of the Congo, and look at what's going on there. 60 million people, surrounded by 9 nations. We're all trying to carve up natural resources. And so you have this internal displacement. You have some 6 to 10 million that have actually been killed, and then another maybe 15 to 20 that have been abused by this whole thing. So you have all these stresses going on, so then that directly relates to your area, which is public health, and it relates to malaria, dengue fever, yellow fever, all these other things that are going on within society.
But we bring this up because people tend to forget the stress, the human difficulty aspect, and tend to look at, the headline grabbers, the hurricanes, the severe storms. I mean, and some people even look at tsunamis and earthquakes as part of climate change in the world, but they have nothing to do with it. But, it's the headline grabbers that get all the attention, and they're not necessarily the most serious problems.
Well, in our Power for Peace that we're really promoting and developing through the EmeraldPlanet, this is the whole thing saying we need to pre-stage, we need to have the equipment, the technologies, the processes, and the programs in place. So as in a Haiti, you start planting trees, you allow them to have alternative energy, you take the stress off of having denuded the forest of all the undergrowth, and allow that watershed to develop. But that's really not happening. It's just we keep responding to disasters instead of creating a plan in advance to mitigate the disaster literally before it ever happens.
Well, there's a term in epidemiology that people use. It's called drop-dead epidemiology. And basically, there's a notion, if somebody doesn't drop dead from a problem, we don't really worry about it. If they drop dead, people sit up and notice. So environment is one of those drop-dead issues. I mean, if you happen to have been down south when Katrina hit, you're sensitive to climate change, global warming, and hurricanes. If you don't, well, it happened elsewhere.
Or you're in Aichi in Indonesia when the tsunami came through a number of years ago. But one of the things that we need to be sensitive to, looking at this comparison here, that you brought this slide in about Kilimanjaro and the African continent. Of course, most people are not even aware that they have snow on Kilimanjaro. But tell us the contrast between these two.
Well, you can see, I mean, you just look. I mean, there you have picture. I don't remember the date. I think it's 1990.
It's in 1970, and then you have the early 2000s.
And so in a 30 years difference, I mean, you can see perceptibly how much, and that's way high up. I mean, that's.
And this is happening all over the globe. But we've had the Austrian ambassador here. We're actually planning for the German ambassador to come in, talk about some of their glaciers. We had the ambassador from Nepal. And all of these people are facing with the same thing, is that you have these declining glaciers, and that slow melt provides water for millions of people all over the globe. And so this is this whole thing that you're talking about here, this drop dead scenario, is that when you look at these, we're getting to that edge, not there yet, but we're getting to that edge where we need to be very serious to what's going on around us. Now, looking at this, the greenhouse gas emissions and all of that, what is the impact? Because you have some people saying, no, it's just the natural cycles that the Earth is going through. Others are saying it's man-made. What's happening here?
Well, discrepancy in science doesn't mean that there's discord. You can take two grandmothers arguing over a recipe for cookies, and before you know it, one will call the other a fool and blah, blah. I mean, it just, so some of that we have here, but people are taking it out of proportion. There's actually 6 greenhouse gases. Carbon dioxide is the most frequently looked at because it comes primarily from generation of power and fossil fuel consumption. But what this graph is nice is you see the little blue line across the top is talking about methane. And methane, it's important because that's showing the relative power. Methane is 21 or 23 more times more potent than is carbon dioxide.
Now this is really interesting, Jim, because most people don't talk about methane.
No.
And the release that now it's coming of the methane out of the tundras as you're getting global warming across the Arctic and going in Russia and places like that. Well, so there's a very real impact that's happening.
Out of sight, out of mind. And so
as long as it's out in Siberia, don't worry about it. Is that what they're saying?
A lot of methane comes from degradation of organic matter that's garbage.
Of course, yeah.
So people don't, and a lot of it comes from farming areas. And flatulence in cows. I mean, but a lot of people they're not aware of it. Therefore, it doesn't exist. And the solid waste is extremely important when you look at the relationship. I mean, it's linked to climate change. It's even linked to avian flu, because you have birds that are, that can become infected. They come down and feed on the waste, because in most developing countries, you just simply have open dumps.
Yeah, and or like in many of the countries I've been in, you have been too, is that you just have these slow burning rubbish piles that just actually adds to the environment and all that. We just have about 30 seconds left, Jim. Tell us about this, and then we're going to have a second segment, so we'll be talking about this in greater depth, and we'll kick off with this. But what does this say to our viewers out there, and what's happening in the 21st century? This
is one of my favorite slides here. It shows that that the world is already urbanized. It's half urban, but when you look at the populations, people are living more along coastal areas. And so about half, it's expected by the year 2030, maybe 60% of the population will be living in a coastal zone.
And of course they need to get access to water, and right now 54%, as we know, of the population of the globe, being estimated by the UN, live in urban areas. Thank you for being with us. Come back as we look around the globe to create the Emerald Planet.
Around the world, 1 out of every 3 women will be beaten or otherwise abused in their lifetime, often by a family member or loved one. A future free from violence. It's all she's ever wished for.
Did you know you have the power to stop children from joining gangs? You can help a father find a job and home for his family. You can assist a woman who can't afford the medicine she needs to live and the home she can't live without. You can choose to make a difference in our community. Support Volunteers of America, and you can help improve the lives of nearly 2 million Americans each year with programs and services that help individuals and families overcome their challenges to become as independent as possible. Support the programs that are working in our community. Contact Volunteers of America today. Call 1-800-899-0089.
For some folks, saving for the future is easy, but for you, it might take a little more effort. Saving for your future is your responsibility, and there's a lot to save for.
I never thought of that.
Like your child's education, perhaps uncovered medical expenses, or just to be sure you can live the way you want when you retire. The time is now to save for tomorrow. Save now or work forever. The choice is yours. Choose to save.
We're back to the Inside Scoop Emerald Planet. Here again, your host, Dr. Sam.
Thank you for being with us as we come to you from Washington, D.C., looking around the globe at 143 different nations and talking about the whole issues of climate change and the stress that is being brought about to humankind from the lack of water. The alternative power systems are not where they should be as far as the solar, wind, low-flow hydro, biodiesel, and others, so we're continuing to use fossil fuels, which adds to the CO2 and other releases into the environment. And so there's a whole host of issues as the planet now accommodates about 7 billion souls. And so how we deal with this whole thing of food, fuel, and fiber for all of humankind, and at the same time is to give them a standard of living, a quality of life that's been expected by many in North America, Europe, and some parts of Asia. And so what we're doing is we're talking about these stresses that have been brought and how that impacts on public health, education, and economic stability, and also the whole notion of economic serenity in some of these areas. And so we have Dr. James A. Listorti, who's here. He's a public and environmental health specialist. Jim has been with us and talked about some of these issues. And we're going to start off with his first slide here of the globe and looking down from the satellite and looking at the magnitudes of the lights, where the populations are today. This is in the early part of the 21st century. And Jim, where are they going to be as we move through 2030, 40, and 50?
Well, you're going to have a little bit more trim around the edges there.
So we'll have a highlight around all the comments.
The edges. But the point here is that there's we are urban now. I mean, it's a couple of years ago, 2007, the world hit 50% urban. The first city to hit 1 million was Rome, ancient Rome. The second was London in about 1800. Now there's 398 cities that have the population of 1 million. Not only that, there's 33 megacities. Megacities defined by the United Nations as having a population over 8 million. Tokyo's the biggest city with 26 million. But there's 33 megacities of over 8 million. 28 of them are in developing countries, and 21 of them are coastal.
And the whole thing about that too, Jim, going back to this number of your megacities, and the total number of cities you said was well over 300, over 1 million. 195 of these are actually sitting over major earthquake faults,
yeah,
or in the line for tsunamis, hurricanes, and other severe weather events. And so when you look at the expansion, these huge cities, and the pearl that we're putting people in, they move out of the countryside because of the lack of water and security and other things. They're moving in an area actually may be more dastardly, which is what happened in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, when you had a city of 2.7 million and then you had 250,000 deaths or even more. So looking at that stress and looking at this picture here that's coming out of southern India gives you an idea of some of the stresses that people have as far as just the day-to-day existence and managing their lives. So extrapolate this picture for us, Jim, of what's going on in the developing world and those 105 countries where malaria is evident.
As I said earlier, a lot of the stress has been put on the headline grabbers of extreme weather events, the hurricanes, the heat waves. But one of the most, and probably the single most important problem, health problem related to climate change is malnutrition and water scarcity. The malnutrition, right now there's 21 countries that are considered by the UN as cropland or freshwater scarce. That will go up to 36 in 2025, and that means that about 17% of the population, global population, is going to be water scarce or have problems of just having enough water. Right now, there's 854 million people who are chronically malnourished. They're not so sure how that's going to jump, but it doesn't certainly going to look like it's going to go down. And so you take a continent like Africa, where 70% of the people are dependent on agriculture. Well, there you go. I mean, you know, and put it the opposite extreme. I mean, so much of the world is in slums.
Well, looking at this slide that we have here, what's going on here?
What's going on here is this shows the main effects of climate change and global warming, where you have the most important one is, the biggest one I should say, is with increase in malnutrition. And those is a combination of the effect and the confidence level that people have in predicting it. The next one down is, what is the third one?
Okay,
I can't read it. That's...
increase in number of people suffering from deaths, disease, and injuries from extreme weather.
Extremes. So that's the, yeah, so those are the hurricane, and one, it's kind of
like
curious.
Like the tsunamis and the earthquakes.
Well,
and all that.
Tsunami isn't, this is not reflecting earthquakes and tsunamis. It's reflecting extreme events.
Just extreme weather events.
Extreme weather, heat waves.
Like the typhoons,
Yep.
heat, dust storms, those kinds of things.
And then we also have the problem of a change in vector habitat. Vectors are disease-spreading critters, such as mosquitoes, which spread malaria, but there's several other types, cone-nosed bugs, what do you call, snails, and so as the climate changes, their habitat will change, and it's expected that malaria, again, will get worse. So this slide is showing, you know, the relative importance of all those. And one of the most important parts, if you go down and you see the air pollution one, climate change is expected to worsen, well, it does worsen, it's not expected to get worse, but climate change worsens the effect of existing air pollution. So,
well, tell us a little bit about that and clarify that point, because you know, there's a number of, if you will, climate change doubters are saying that we really don't really have any impact on what's going on. This is a natural cause, natural ebb and flow of what's going on in the world, but actually it's all causational.
Yeah. If we look at 2003, when they had the heat wave in Europe, there were 53,000 deaths, 52,000 something, but close to 53,000 deaths related to the heat wave. And when they did the analysis of the data afterward, they found that a significant number came from heart problems related to air pollution. And that was a surprise that, you know, that there was that very strong a link.
So this was really the first time the science actually caught up to the reality of what's going on.
And shows, number one, that it's not only, even though I had the thing over there earlier that showed most of the problems are going to be in poor countries, it shows, as does the brush fires in Australia, that developed countries, industrialist countries, are certainly not immune.
Well, the whole thing about what's going on in Australia right now with the brush fires and also the sandstorms coming out, they've closed down the international airport. They had to stop much of the traffic in downtown Sydney. Now, this is the mega city that we're talking, well, not a mega city, but for Australia it is, when you have the population base. And so there's a real need to address these issues. Looking at this next slide, this is the major climate change impacts that we're talking about here. And this is something, as we look around the globe, as we're seeing, it's really throughout all of the continents.
Yeah. I mean, what this is showing is that the change, it's reflecting a combination of the droughts, the extreme events, the floods, and it shows that the area points throughout the world where there's likely to be you know, what is the cows showing livestock?
Oh, the livestock animal husbandry. Yes.
Yeah, and so and it's primarily relating to food, because one is showing this cereal.
Well, then you have livestock and the other's forestry.
Forestry, so all those things. So this is showing the natural resource base that's being threatened by drought and by inclement weather.
And the whole thing about all that, Jim, is that when we're looking at the decrease as far as the fuel, fiber, and food production, is that the population base of the globe itself continues to expand. So even in some populated countries, say Germany, Japan, and others with rapidly aging populations, there's a slight decline. It's still in South America and Africa, you still have a sharp incline as far as the population base.
The worry is that it would hit the breadbasket
Well,
areas.
Looking at this whole notion of floods and the water issues, going to this next slide, it just really shows you the magnitude of what's going on around the entire globe. Very few areas are not immune to what is going on in this whole area. So tell us a little bit about what we see here and what's the long-term impact of this?
Well, this is another good one. You can see that the problems are concentrated in the developing countries, but take a peek and look at the southern part of the United States. And, you know, we're not immune to that either, because the floods are essentially weather related. So it's increased precipitation, and all that just simply says it's global problems.
Well, looking at this slide here of the flooding, I was recently in Bangladesh, where you have over 100 million people in the country, where truly half the population could be looking at what we're looking at right here, as they're being displaced. And of course, Pakistan this year with the massive flooding, and that was in some cases 2/3 of the entire population of Pakistan was affected by these floods. So it's just incredible what we're looking at and what we're faced with. And of course, in shantytowns that you're looking at here, this is just a real problem. But I love the thing that you've been talking about, Jim, is where you have these stresses. You have the climate change, and then it directly relates to the impact of disease. Share a little bit more with us about that, the correlation.
Here we've got, look at slums, and one of the few times when people who live in slums have a benefit is that in the severe weather thing, a lot of damage comes from hurricanes from building collapse. Well, their buildings are so shoddy and small that there really is not much to collapse on them, so that's a, you know, in quotation marks, a little bit of a benefit.
But there's still this direct correlation, this impact, and we only have about 30 seconds left to draw this distinction as far as the poverty, the nature of the life of roughly half of the globe, and relate to climate change.
Well, the important thing when looking at this is that there are solutions, and a lot of them are simply, they're available at the household. You know, I remember in Chicago when they had the death rates of 700, that they found that a lot of the people, or older people, nailed their windows shut because they were afraid of burglary. And so that has nothing to do with the healthcare system.
But it has security. Thank you for being with us as we look around the globe to create the Emerald Planet.
Listen to smoke before you give it a try. Only you. Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about wreaked out money. Nothing very nice. Homeless mind. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches. Don't play with fire.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire.
Why don't you just wash your car at home?
When I wash my car, everything runs down the street and down into the storm drains. With all the chemicals in the soaps and waxes, the last thing I want to do is poison my own drinking water.
At least here, it's all contained and recycled on site.
That's why I also take my car in for oil changes instead of doing it myself. I might take a chance on spilling stuff.
You know what the best part is?
What?
More time to kick back and watch the game.
How far would you go to protect the planet?
I want you to build an ark.
Here we go. Okay, that's good. Oh, okay. Ow! Oh!
Maybe there's another way.
People, the flood is imminent!
Is it too much to ask for a little precipitation?
Go to fightglobalwarming.com to find out what you and your community can do to reduce global warming pollution.
Somewhere around the world, there are men and women of the armed forces risking their lives, helping rebuild communities after natural disasters, collecting toys for needy children, tutoring kids in school. These are your sons and daughters who work to keep us safe, secure, and free. Dedicated men and women who put their country first.
to the Inside Scoop Emerald Planet. Here again, your host, Dr. Sam.
Thank you for being with us as we come to you from Washington, D.C., from looking at around the globe in 143 different nations, looking at the ways that we can address severe climate change to bring about alternative power systems, and many of the issues to bring about a better quality of life for fully some 3 billion people, those that are bottom of the pyramid that we constantly hear about. And many of them are in the 105 nations that are faced with malaria, many of the other ravages of diseases that have been around, known for the last 400 or 500 years, and yet very little has been done about it. At the same time, when you have the stress of internal displacement, meaning people do not have the fuel and the fiber they need to stay in one place in the countryside, they move into the cities. They move to the coastal areas where there's more water. So you have this constant movement of people through around the globe. And so what can we do to address some of this? We've been talking about the issues and the challenges have been made. So now we need to look at what are some of the solutions. We have Sandra Cointreau, who is a civilian and environmental engineer. She's actually coming to us by Skype out of Connecticut, so we're going to have her on. We have her slides and presentation actually in the studio. Sandra, welcome. Glad to have you here.
Thank you.
And,
nice to be here.
And we have to say, based on everything that we know about Sandra, she is the best of the best around the whole world. And we're really pleased to have you. And I have to say that she was a global advisor in waste management and a number of other issues at the World Bank. She's retired from there, has her own organization, and Sandra, we're really pleased to have you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And we have Jim still in the studio with us, so if you happen to drop off up there, we have your slides. He went through them with us, and so we're going to keep on going, but thank you for being with us. But looking at the global context, I have your slide up here. We're going to go ahead and bring that up and ease out from Sandra so we can bring up the first slide. And let's talk about the global context. What is that, Sandra? And let's set the stage for our viewers around the globe.
Yeah, this first slide just gives some idea of how many people in the world and how many of our livestock in the world are living in developing countries. So about 80% of the world's people are in developing countries, and about 40% of the livestock being raised to feed the people of the world are now in developing countries. And in fact, China right now is the largest producer of poultry and meat and fish in the world. And so we're seeing a big shift of livestock production going to developing countries. The other thing that, of course, people are now mentioning quite often is that in the past 2 years, over 50% of the world's population has now been proven to be living in cities.
Yeah, I think the World Bank has it now. It's about 54%. And of course, as you know, with this continued internal displacement of citizens looking for a better quality of life, that numbers continue to increase. And I think our colleague Jim sitting with us here is saying that within the next 20 years, it may be as many as 60% of the world's population be in urban areas.
People are looking for jobs, and they're looking for education for their children and opportunities for their families. So, you know, we can expect that trend to continue.
Well, looking at this next one as the municipal solid waste generation, we know that comes with more people in urban areas. Also, as many of your populations become more affluent, over the last 30 years, I've been involved with Japan and then Korea and now Vietnam and China. The amount and actually what they call the quality of the waste continues to increase. Tell us a little bit about that and what does that mean, Sandra?
Well, there's a perception that only the high-income countries are producing a lot of waste. And what this diagram shows...
Let's bring back this chart because I think it's important.
In the high-income countries, we have about 1 billion of the world's population, whereas about 5.4 billion are in the developing countries. So the solid waste in the high-income countries is less than half the amount in the developing countries. even though the rate per person is lower in developing countries, the total quantity of waste being generated there is much higher.
Now, we're looking at this whole thing as far as the generation of waste too, as I experienced in Asia, because we were working on dealing with municipal solid waste over the last 30 years, is that you had much higher incidence of plastic, woods, and wrapping and other kinds of solid waste versus it was mostly animal and vegetable waste the first years that I was in Japan back in the 70s. So this whole idea of manufactured goods is actually increasing to the level of the waste. Even in the developing world, it's increasing.
Yes. Yes, the amount of waste per person dramatically increases as the economic level of the country and the individuals in it increases, because when people have more money, they of course buy more things, there's more packaging, and they have more consumer goods, so there's much more waste.
Well, and then the whole thing too of the prepared foods in many of these areas, such I was recently in the Congo and southern Africa, is that many people are going out and getting packaged foods because they absolutely do not have food in their own home areas they can depend on, so they have to have packaged foods. And I think this is a new phenomena that you've been reporting on in your research and your writings.
That's right. And now that it's a global economy, people are buying from all over the world. And of course, when they buy from away from their local area, it has to come with a lot more packaging in order to be transported.
Well, I think this one number that you have here in this slide, and then we'll go to the next set, but as far as the low-income populations, this 2.4 billion persons you're talking about, is that, they really are, even though they're in slums, they're still generating more and more solid waste, which is indicative of where we're going in the 21st century. And that adds extra strain to them because, where is the solid waste going to go? Because there's no real way to dispose of and deal with it in a very realistic manner.
Yeah, it's a huge problem. And as they begin to industrialize, then they add to that the fact that they will have industrial waste with a number of hazardous components.
Well, looking at the local financing, and I love the way that you've laid this out, Sandra, because it's a very nice logical flow of the problems we're having. And when you think of finance, you think again more of the affluent, the higher end countries, but finance is critically important if there's going to be any development and a better way of life or a way out of the slums that we have for these developing countries. Touch on the finances, and let's bring this slide up for Sandra so that we can share this with our viewers.
This slide is really important to me because so often people think, well, those people in developing countries are poorer, so therefore they have their costs for service are not very high. They assume that there's a direct relationship between having a lower income and also having a lower cost of service. And first of all, that is really not true. In a global economy where many of these countries don't have fuel, for example, they'll have to import fuel, and they might be paying more for fuel than countries that are much bigger and much richer and may even have fuel.
Well, let me interject something.
They don't have a lot of purchasing power to get a good price. So they may pay more for that. They also have to import their equipment, their trucks and their bulldozers and all their equipment. So they may wind up paying more for a bulldozer or a refuse truck in an African country than we would have to pay for it here in the United States, or Europeans would pay for it, because we're making them locally, and they don't have to be transported, and there are no customs duties and all of that. So one of the issues is not only that their costs are not necessarily lower, but then on top of that, they have so much less money per person. Here in high-income countries like Europe and Japan and the United States, we average, anywhere from $35,000 to $40,000 per capita per year.
And let's bring this slide back up so we can reinforce what Sandra is saying.
Yeah,
right now.
gross national product. And a large percentage of the money that we have in gross national product as our income goes to our taxes. So government has a fair amount of money to be able to spend on infrastructure and services. You know, on average, at least $6,000 per person per year is available to government to provide service. Whereas if you look down at what the incomes are in developing countries, it's anywhere from $600 per person per year in a poor country, and in the middle income country, maybe around $3,000. And you'll see that the percentages of what is collected in revenues and taxes by government is lower. And in the poorest countries, they're averaging more like 10 or 11% of tax income. So they might only have about $64 per person per year to be able to spend on services.
Well, the whole thing about that, Sandra, is that goes, and we'll talk about this in segment 4 about infrastructure. There's really very little money to provide the infrastructure, the roads, the schools, the hospitals, and other things that are needed.
Very little money.
But your point was really well made and taken. It's just the example of Uganda and many countries in the central part of Africa, where here we're paying about $3 a gallon for diesel fuel. Over there, the diesel fuel is much lower quality, but yet it's almost to $7 a gallon.
Exactly.
And so when you're trying to deliver goods and services to poor regions and you're paying $7 a gallon, guess what? Many of those services actually just don't go to those areas, and the government officials just don't have a way to get out there. So we have only about a minute left, Sandra, and you're coming to us from Connecticut. And I'm going to put up, let's look at this last slide here. But just tell us, with the viewers, what would you like to share in these last 30 seconds for our viewers here and around the globe?
You'll see that in the high-income countries, we're basically collecting all of the waste. We're recycling or recovering resources from about half of it, including waste energy. And we're landfilling about half of it. But when you go to developing countries, collection levels are very low, ranging anywhere from like 40 to 60% of the total waste is collected, and the level of safe disposal is very low. Some countries have
Sandra, we have only about 10 seconds left, and
so very low levels of safe disposal, less than 30%
Thank you for being with us as we create the Emerald Planet.
In Africa.
I helped turn my child's public school into a whole new kind of school. One with a curriculum that really motivates kids. One that has extended hours, 6 days a week, year-round. With loads of academic, cultural, and recreational activities. One that has support services like medical and dental right there. A school where parents' involvement is encouraged, where teachers have more time to teach, and students are excited about learning. There's just one problem. My child doesn't ever want to come home. You can help turn your school into a community school for excellence. Find out how. Call 1-877-LOVE-TO-LEARN.
It's coming. Right to your neighborhood. And when it does, you may be surprised. It's your Social Security statement of your benefits, and it's going to help you plan your financial future. Your benefit statement will tell you how much Social Security you're eligible to receive and when you'll get it. Then you'll know how much you need to save for retirement, because that's coming too. The future is in your hands. Choose to save.
The toxic fumes from this meth lab are seeping into Jamie's sinus cavity. Ammonia vapors invade her throat. Toxic gases fill her lungs. Jamie's body is deteriorating. And she doesn't even know it.
Jamie, dinner.
So, who has the drug problem now? Find out how meth affects you at drugfree.org/meth.
We're back to the Inside Scoop Emerald Planet. Here again, your host, Dr. Sam.
Thank you for being with us on the Emerald Planet as we come to you from Washington, D.C., looking around the globe at 143 different nations for those best practices that can be used to address the issues of climate change and everything that's going on in the globe as the population base continues to expand. I should introduce, and I didn't do this in the last segment, but we have Dr. James A. Listorti, who is here with us. He's Public Environmental Health Specialist. And he's a colleague of our world-renowned environmental and civil engineer who's worked with the World Bank and has her own international consulting company, Sandra Cointreau. And Sandra, we're glad you're with us. And I need to announce that she's coming in to us on Skype, and actually is situated in Connecticut. So, dear viewer, if we get this lag or some overlap of our conversation, you know it's just the technology, and we're doing the very best we can, because on Emerald Planet we're going to have more and more remote interviews as we're looking for the best of the best, and Sandra is certainly recognized as that. So Sandra, we're going to come up with this first slide that you shared with us. This is about the population growth and the income levels and production of livestock. So if you can tell us a little bit about that, the impact of it, and how that relates to climate change and also the quality of life.
Great, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And this slide is, it gives an indication of how the livestock population of the planet is growing. As countries develop economically, people are more and more desirous of eating meat, and meat consumption is growing enormously in developing countries. You can see in high-income countries that the people growth is really not so high, but the growth in cattle and pigs and sheep and goats and poultry is really very significant. And in low and middle income countries, you'll see, again, here we have a pretty high growth of people, but at the same time, a very significant growth in livestock, particularly in intensive farms that grow chickens.
Well, the whole thing about that, Sandra, as we have more of these, what they call corporate farms, you know, kind of the idealized way. I came off of a farming operation. We had about 1,200 acres, so that was quite significant in those days. But yet over 85% of the food and the grain and the meat production are in corporate farms in the United States. And of course that's something that's growing around the globe. So you have this greater concentrations of waste that are going out into the land and the water. But at the same time you have this encroachment of populations on these corporate farms and this mass production of this the waste, even the gases that are coming off to the animals. So you really have, it's almost like the worst of the worst in many ways. We're demanding more meat, it's higher cost to have it, but also we're generating much more waste, and much more waste of grains and other natural resources going to be used by humankind to feed the animals.
Yes, and what we'll be talking about as a focus on this segment is how much more dangerous that waste now is from when there used to be pastoral systems. The manures from the industrialized operations have quite a few dangerous materials, and we are not regulating them anywhere in the world.
Now, bringing up this next slide, we're talking about the ratio as far as the
that backyard barnyard manure, and it's not. It's really become industrial waste. This is just a little slide that indicates that now, or in 2000, there was 1 person for every 5.5 livestock, but by 2030, it'll be about 1 person for every 6.5 livestock on the planet. So that's a very significant, almost a 20% increase in livestock to people ratio.
Looking at the animal production growth, Sandra, go ahead and just share about this because of the delay that we have using the Skype. Sometimes we're talking over each other. Why don't you go ahead and let's just go through this talk about the significance and also the long-term impact on both climate change and also the quality of life for the citizens that are faced with this around the globe.
Well, anytime we have more livestock, we have a lot more climate change emissions, because one of the biggest emissions from methane, which is a very potent greenhouse gas, comes from the enteric fermentation of livestock that are ruminates. So particularly cows, some goats, and some other animals release a huge amount of methane as part of their digestive system. And so there isn't really a way to capture that methane from each animal, and so it's a very serious issue. But in terms of the waste, it's important to know that more than half of the world's antibiotics are being consumed by the livestock industry, because they are feeding antibiotics in these really highly congested feeding operations that are industrialized. They're feeding these antibiotics to them in order to get fast growth. And so antibiotic resistance that is developing in the world is coming largely from this huge amount of antibiotic consumption by the livestock industry. In the United States, 70% of the antibiotics consumed in the United States are being consumed by livestock industry. And only 15% of that is for therapy. 85% is to have faster growth.
Now, the whole thing about
more than 90% of those antibiotics, when excreted, are going directly into the environment and being put on our land to you know, as manure is put on the land. And so the antibiotics are taken up into the food chain, and also they're released into the water systems when there is surface runoff after rainfalls. So it's a very big health issue, and WHO has said it's one of the most important health issues of the world.
Well, I think, Sandra, looking at this telling slide, I want to go back to that about the amount of consumption as far as meat and milk in the developing world. I think that is very significant because...
Yes, this is very telling, and it's important because the developing countries are following the practices that we have in industrialization of our systems, and so they're copying those and switching from pastoral systems to industrial systems. And you can see that meat production in developing countries is growing 4 times faster than its growth in high-income countries.
What I want to do...
by 2020, FAO and the World Bank are estimating that 63% of the meat and 50% of the milk production will actually be done in developing countries.
I want to have Jim
mentioned China is already the largest producer in the world.
Sandra, let me have Jim chime in on this, because this is something that he knows much about. But Jim Listorti, looking at this statistic here as far as this increase, what are the long-term implications on public health where you have people having more fats, more carbohydrates in their diets, and so the incidence they're saying now of obesity in many developing countries is rising at a faster rate than maybe even in the industrial world?
Well, there's a new term that's been coined called globesity.
Globesity, okay.
Globesity now exists, and it's obvious that, you know, that with this higher diet, but it's more the beef that's problematic than the other issues, than the other meats.
Mm-hmm. Such as chicken, pork, and
right,
fish, of
and
course.
then they're higher on the food chain, and the environmental consequences of fattening up a cow is much more severe, plus the fertilizer that goes into the food that feeds the cow, all these linkages. And in developing countries, there's a propensity, I learned this from Sandra in one of the seminars she put on, there's still a preference for live meat, I mean not live, freshly killed meat. So even if somebody has a supermarket there, they want to get meat that's been killed that day, so that has consequences for the proximity or the emplacement of the slaughterhouses and the abattoirs, near population centers.
Well, Sandra, now it's going to come back to you since we've set that stage as far as the impact on humankind because of your work in municipal solid waste and the infrastructure development you've done. This is really telling because, again, we have this juxtaposition of we have this high levels of waste being generated. As you said, much of it's toxic, but the population is actually coming closer and closer to the source all the time as we have this fresh meat now more and less in our urban areas. So what do you see long term as far as the impact and what needs to be done in developing countries to address the infrastructure to take care of this increased meat production, but also the increased amount of solid waste?
Well, I'm very concerned about the production going on in the whole world. From my point of view, livestock waste is the most important environmental and health problem in waste management at this time, from my point of view. I think it's a very dangerous issue because it's not being regulated. Right now, 60% of all known infectious diseases infect both humans and people. So 60% of the 1,500 diseases that exist in the world are zoonotic. They infect us both. And 70% of all the emerging human diseases in the past 15 years have come from animals.
That's a staggering thought.
There's this enormous transition to animal-based diseases affecting us, like bird flu, like SARS, like the mad cow disease. These are all animal-based diseases. And the thing is that these diseases are coming from poor waste management.
Sandra, we have just a few seconds left, about 30 seconds. What would you like to share right now in 30 seconds with our domestic and international viewers about this issue and what we're going to be faced with over the next 20, 30 years?
Well, I think that more and more of this waste is going to be handled in developing countries, and we need to support them to improve their regulatory framework and improve their systems as a priority for the global health.
Thank you very much, Sandra, for being with us as we look around the globe to create the Emerald Planet.